Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Mark and I thank you so much for coming by today. Now, I don't know about you, but growing up a young artist and musician, I was fortunate to meet some amazing people and have some incredible experiences in my life. I had mentors early on who taught me to see things differently and look to the side of what everyone else was paying attention to. I performed on stage with musicians who helped me become better at playing my own instrument and how to interact musically with other musicians. But despite those people and experiences, things weren't always so positive. There were times when we'd have to cancel a gig that I was really excited to play because one of our bandmates didn't show up, causing resentment. Or when I thought for sure I was going to get a promotion that went to my coworker instead, causing jealousy. And of course, times when a project would be falling apart, but because of my own pride, I'd keep going without asking for help until everything collapsed. And that's the theme of today's discussion, the 7 deadly sins. It's a theme commonly found throughout history in literature, art, theater, and music. While I remember learning about this as a kid, my first real exposure to the 7 deadly sins was when we read Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales back in high school. It really captured my imagination, and I absorbed the lessons we were taught, applying them to my own life in order to try and be more productive and live a more wholesome life. Well, as I got older, those old thematic warnings seemed to become less important and less relevant, and life went on as normal without worry. But I kept coming across these themes over and over in my life. From Boccaccio's The Decameron, Paradise Lost by Milton, and Dante's Divine Comedy, these were just a few of the books I read that brought a more full scope to the theme in my life. Marianne Faithfull, a popular folk musician, teamed up with Kurt Weill to perform an operatic version of the 7 deadly sins. In 1995, the film Seven was released, in which a serial killer uses the 7 deadly sins as his motif for his crimes. And in 2012, Japanese manga artist Nakaba Suzuki began an action fantasy series called The 7 Deadly Sins, and after selling over 10 million copies, it became an animated series which, as of this discussion, you can find on Netflix. The origins of the 7 deadly sins as we know them today are credited with the Greeks and have been updated and interpreted throughout history. The intent was to identify and use as a list of teaching points to help people avoid corruption of the spirit and condemnation of the soul. For me, as I said, I was always fascinated with them and found them to be a source of great inspiration. Growing up, as I became more and more exposed to different aspects of our culture, from music to movies, friends and family, and even strangers out and about in the world, I began to notice how these 7 deadly sins were exhibited everywhere and became thoroughly ingrained in our everyday routines. Movies and television showed scenes of lust. I'd see people gorging themselves on food in restaurants, and I'd see arrogant, boastful politicians on TV. Even in my own family, there was envy over presents we got and greed to keep my siblings from eating my favorite kind of ice cream. But later, when I'd go to my job and work like a horse, only to see coworkers goofing off and being lazy, I'd feel resentful and angry. I like to believe that I've been able to control my emotions and say that I'm not affected by these 7 deadly sins anymore, but that wouldn't be true. I'm still affected, and it's part of what makes me who I am. The difference is I'm aware of these vices and I try to keep myself in check from them, not letting them get out of control or to influence me in a negative way. But how does this list of ethical teachings relate to those in the creative arts? Can there be anything learned by applying the 7 deadly sins to artists? Well, let's find out about this right after this coffee break. In my experience, there's no particular order that this list appears in, and with the exception of one, which I'll get into later, none seem to be more crucial than the others. So let's get right into this discussion about the 7 deadly sins of art, starting with the most commonly familiar, lust. Lust is one of 3 sins that focuses on an excessive or perverse love of something good. It's typically associated with an overwhelming sexual desire, but can also relate in other ways as well. For artists, lust relates to an unyielding desire for fame, recognition, wealth, or even power. It forces an artist to put aside rational thought and responsibility to pursue an emotional hunger that can never be satisfied. The effect is a blind indulgence of the artist until it's too late. It's the dancer who refuses to acknowledge her sore leg and keeps practicing until she injures herself and can no longer dance. It's the musician who keeps playing his part over and over, ignoring the blisters on his fingers until he can't play anymore. I had a friend who used to spend all his money on his paint and canvases and brushes, claiming it was his passion and he was obsessed. Yet, he never seemed to have enough money to pay his rent, and finally his landlord kicked him out and he had to find a new place to live. Lust is considered deadly because it puts rational thinking behind a shroud of impulsive emotions that cloud good judgment and favor reckless abandon. Number 2, gluttony. Gluttony, like lust, is the second of 3 sins that focuses on an excessive or perverse love of something good. We usually think of food when we think of gluttony. However, it's about deriving more pleasure from something than it was intended for. It's the abhorrent consumption of goodness until it's exhausted and turns foul. For artists, it's the sheer overindulgence in the excess of their craft. It's the photographer who completely drains the energy and spirit out of their model. It's the painter who consumes all their art supplies without regard for cost or availability. Or even the art collector who's not satisfied with just 1 or 2 pieces, but must have the entire body of work all to themselves. The result is that by consuming to the point beyond excess, all appreciation for that thing is lost. It's the difference between enjoying a single serving as opposed to consuming an entire supply, leaving nothing for anyone else to enjoy. For an artist to put all others to the side in an effort to devour and consume all resources, attention, and experience for themselves, it's both egregious and malicious, and as with food, it brings the risk of choking on self-gratification. Number 3, greed. Greed, also known as avarice, is the third of these 3 sins to focus on excessive or perverse love for something good. While lust is the desire and gluttony is the volume, greed is the appetite that grinds down rational and ethical thought for the complete and obsessive need to acquire far beyond the level of excess. Greed turns artists into slaves, twisting our natural creative spirit and perversing our perspective to see only methods of gain for ourselves in ways that are often dubious and nefarious. Greedy artists charge more money for a job than was actually expected or required. They steal ideas and call them their own. They trash talk other artists to raise their own reputation. They withhold information to keep others from moving forward, or they use another's exhibit or platform to showcase their own work. And once greed gets into our system of thought, it's not easy to get away from. I've seen lots of web designers and graphic artists who are quick to justify charging more money because they feel the client can afford it. In fact, I had a client that once told me that I should bill extra hours because the company could afford it. Well, I admit it was tempting, but that's not how I work. I believe in being paid for what I earn and being honest, and to me, that's why my clients continue to call me back. Number 4, sloth. Sloth is different in that it's the absence of love, or the absence of caring. In simple terms, it's willful laziness. Arguably, sloth is the most applicable to artists in procrastination and seeing projects through to the finish. It's the artist who always has 10,000 excuses or reasons why they can't succeed, or why they can't do what was expected of them. They're absurdly disorganized, with no intent of cleaning up their workspace despite its condition or who complains. Sloth keeps a musician from playing because they refuse to fix their faulty gear. It's the artist who won't paint because their brushes are covered in dried and thick paint. It's the writer who sits around watching television all day instead of writing. Many of us have to get on top of ourselves to keep our gear clean, our space organized, and to motivate ourselves to get things done. However, sloth is the extreme opposite of this. It's the absolute absence of care, the absence of concern or motivation to exert any effort in any capacity. At one prominent company I worked at, I hired a young man as a production designer. He interviewed really well and looked capable on paper. But once I got him into the role and into the chair, I saw a very different person emerge right in front of me. He began coming in later and later every day. Some days he'd call in sick 2 hours after he was supposed to be at work. He'd boast about how he and his roommates would stay up all night playing video games, drinking and smoking and eating junk food. His workspace became a disaster area, with food, candy wrappers, spilled energy drinks, and trash everywhere. He spent most of his time at work wandering around the office until one day a coworker said that he saw him sleeping in the men's room. I went in to find him, and sure enough, there he was in a stall, snoring. I ended up having to let him go, which was unfortunate, but completely necessary. Sloth is deadly for artists because it buries us beneath our obligations And it buries others in the work or mess that we leave behind, forcing other people to clean up after us, creating a sense of apathy for everyone, and labeling us as unreliable and sometimes unhireable. Number 5, wrath. Wrath is one of the 3 sins that is love twisted and directed to focus harm on others, whether in words, physically, or in reputation. It's the most uncontrollable emotion that's easily provoked but very difficult to calm. Wrath can be triggered when someone harms us or offends us, or someone close to us, and results in a violent reaction of rage, anger, hatred, or even vengeance. It's that emotion that just wants justice and conjures the impulse to damage and destroy. The way I say it is, rage is a hot air balloon that when in full swing shoots skyward, but when exhausted comes crashing down to the ground. Wrath can manifest itself as annoyance, impatience, or even contempt. It can push us emotionally into self-destructive behavior like drugs and alcohol, or can exacerbate potential mental health issues. For an artist who puts exhaustive amounts of time, passion, and energy into their work, a simple, unprovoked criticism can send them into a rage, defending themselves against attitudes or words intended to derail or demean their work. And while I've never seen a fistfight break out in an art exhibit, I've been witness to seeing artists succumb to rage with teachers, art critics, and even other artists whose comments were provocative enough to draw out hostile emotions. It's deadly because it's not something we can internalize and work to resolve. Once the blood boils, it's a challenge to keep the lid on, and wrath can put us into harm's way while also putting us in the position of creating harm for other people. Number 6, envy. Like wrath, envy twists love and redirects us to focus harm toward others. And much like lust and greed, it's an obsessive desire brought on by others, whether their person or their belongings. It's the skilled musician who has no audience who falls envious to that amateur who's adored by a crowd. It's the understudy actress who never gets the lead role. It's the painter who envies the paintings of his peers. It's the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde scenario where reason and logic are cast aside by an intense influence of resentment, sadness, and a yearning to possess the property or abilities of others. It's also known as coveting, and it's a powerful theme throughout history, literature, and the arts. In 2010, the film Black Swan, dancers are consumed with envy and pushed to the brink of sanity in their competition for the lead role in Swan Lake. For artists, it's very easy to fall prey to artist envy, something I discuss in another video of mine. St. Thomas Aquinas claimed that there are 3 stages to envy, which I'll adjust for artists. The first stage is belittling another artist's reputation by criticizing their work, technique, habits, or personal life. The second stage, taking joy at another artist's failure or feeling grief at another artist's success. And the third stage, hatred toward another artist due to our own personal inadequacy, self-doubt, or lack of success. Envy takes joy in the suffering of others, and it unfortunately affects people in all the creative fields and beyond. And lastly, number 7, pride, the most dreadful and serious of all the deadly sins. Pride is in league with wrath and envy and puts all of one's urges and desires before all others, despite how it may affect them. It lays upon the belief of superiority and narcissism and the belief that one is more elite than another. We're taught from a young age, and especially as artists, that we should always believe in ourselves, and that is the root of pride. But when the positive attributes of pride, like taking pride in our work or the prideful feeling of succeeding, become corrupt and turn to hubris or vanity, that's when pride becomes a deadly sin. Pride, it said, leads to all other vices. It's an overly exaggerated form of self-esteem and self-confidence, even at the precipice of complete failure. And while pride has its virtuous side, artists often flaunt their arrogance and boast of their work in a haughty language that makes others feel inferior. Pablo Picasso's arrogance was legendary, boasting at a young age that he could do anything that Goya or Velázquez could do. It's not uncommon to read stories about how great actors or actresses, directors, athletes, or politicians falling from grace, their pride denying all accountability or responsibility for their words or their actions. As an artist, I find it difficult sometimes to be around other artists who are so full of vanity for their own work that they fail to recognize the work of others, or worse, that their work may have some flaw or may need improvement. To step back and look at ourselves and our work and see nothing but perfection is to be prideful and vain. However, to step back and see where we need improvement and recognize our flaws is within the virtuous side of pride, where care and concern for our work are clear and evident. Well, I hope you were able to take something away from this discussion about the 7 deadly sins of art, and that the video was enjoyable for you. I thank you so much for watching today, and I'm grateful that you're here. If you haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing, and I'd love to bring you more content like this. If you have thoughts on this discussion, please leave your comments below, and I'd really enjoy having a conversation down there with you. Thank you again, stay well, and I appreciate your time here. God bless.